You've heard of an underwater mortgage, right? I'm no realtor, but you buy a house, you take out a mortgage on it, and due to the vagaries of the market, over time, the value of your house drops, and the amount of money you still owe on the mortgage exceeds the value of the house. And they say that means that your house is underwater or your mortgage is underwater. Well, that's sort of my beginning analogy for my argument, which is that the American gun debate is underwater. It's upside down. And the gun debate in America in the contemporary era essentially is a debate about gun rights versus gun laws. And you have this fierce political competition between these two values, these two things. And it's treated as kind of a zero-sum debate. So if we have more gun laws, then that means that gun rights are being restricted. If we expand gun rights, it means we have to cut back on gun laws, right? That it's a zero-sum relationship. One gains, but the other loses. But I'm going to argue that that's really false because it misunderstands the nature of gun laws, it misunderstands our history, and what I want to talk about is about what gun laws were really like in America throughout most of our history, literally going back, beginning with 1607, the first colony in America, the Jamestown colony. And let me see. Now, I have to apologize here and explain because I have some PowerPoint, and they're very wordy, which violates sort of the principle of PowerPoint that you're not supposed to have a lot of words in slides, which I understand. But what I'm doing is presenting a lot of text because it's from early laws. And I'm not going to read through most of this stuff at all. But this text is my footnotes. It's to show you that these laws actually exist. I don't want you to take my word for it. I want to show you the actual text so you can see it. So, gun laws. Every imaginable kind of law existed with respect to guns. And we had laws in America that restricted guns, that kept them from Native Americans, from slaves, not a surprise, from indentured servants, from vagrants, from non-Protestants, because you can't trust a Catholic with a gun. In some places, it's well known. Yes, thank you. In many places in America early on, if you refused to swear an oath of loyalty to the government, your gun would be confiscated. Felons were barred from having firearms. Well, not such a surprise there. Foreigners, minors. There were numerous recreational restrictions. There were laws that regulated the use of firearms, the storage of firearms, the transport of firearms, that barred dangerous or unusual weapons, that regulated the manufacture, inspection, and sale of firearms. There were laws pertaining to the storage and discharge of firearms that prohibited the firing of firearms in or near towns, after dark, on Sundays, in public places, in or near roads, and that punished firing that wasted gunpowder or under the influence of alcohol. And these laws existed by the thousands. And the reason I know about this is that somebody else did a whole bunch of legal research, legal work, that has excavated these laws because you can now get old laws throughout America from the earliest times digitally, because these have all been digitized now and people have started to do this work. But I think I'm the first person that will actually publish some of this stuff, so that's kind of interesting to me. So, the first permanent settlement in America was Jamestown, 1607, right? You remember your American history. The first indigenous decision-making body established by European colonists who settled in the colonies was what came to be known as the House of Burgesses, right? It was the governing body of the colony of Virginia. It was established in 1619, right? And in the summer of 1619, in July, it enacted a series of local laws. Now, the colonists were good British subjects, but it took months for information and people to go between England and the colonies, and so they had to have some ability to make local laws to deal with local issues. So in the summer of 1619, they enact about 35 laws to govern the Virginia colony, the fledgling colony, which had barely survived in its early years. And one of those laws was a gun control law. Where am I here? Oh, I'll get to that later. There it is. The Virginia House of Burgesses, 1619. Now that's the actual text of the law that made it a crime to give or sell firearms to Indians, to Native Americans. It was a crime punishable by death. Most of the colonies enacted such laws. Again, not a surprise, because there was much tension, much fighting between, did I do that? No. Between colonists and Native Americans. Now, the laws were not very effective for a host of reasons, but it represented an early concerted effort at gun control of a very specific sort. Now, many places had laws that barred the use of firearms if you were inebriated or intoxicated. This was one such law from 1655, and I forgot to put which, oh, there it is. It was from the colony of Virginia. So it barred the, as it says, persons soever shall, after publication of the law, shoot any guns at drinking, but two exceptions, marriages and funerals. So if you were drunk at a wedding or a funeral, you're fine. Go ahead and shoot away. Excellent. Who says they didn't know how to have a good time in the old days, huh? This is a law. You can see lots of text. Don't read it. In fact, don't read it, because it's too much. But it's from Pennsylvania. It's 1776. It's the year the Revolution really is taking off. And it's a law that refers to something called non-associators. What an odd term. That's a reference to Americans who refused to swear an oath to the new colonial government. If you refused, you were called a non-associator, and this law gave Pennsylvania the power to take your gun from you, and they'd give you a piece of paper, a receipt, saying, we took your gun from you today. There's the receipt to prove it. And we're going to use it to fight the British because we're short of arms. Americans chronically short of arms during the Revolution, of military-grade arms. And if it's still in working condition or it still exists, we'll give it back to you. But if not, well, you're kind of out of luck. North Carolina enacted a law in 1778, and there are many, many, many other examples. I've just plucked a few. This has to do with, as the title says, it's a law to prevent hunting with a gun by firelight at night. It's a hunting restriction in 1778. Why? The law says why. Persons under the pretense of hunting for deer in the night by firelight kill horses and cattle to the prejudice of the owners. Stupid people with guns hunting at night. And if they catch you doing it, the penalty is to impress you into the Continental Army for 3 years. Because the Continental Army was chronically short of manpower. And so here's a way to get more people in the Continental Army. But it's a purely recreational restriction. Kentucky, 1813. Now we're getting into laws that are pertinent to an issue that is very much a contemporary issue, that is the carrying of firearms by civilians out in society, concealed carry. Every state of the union today has some kind of concealed carry firearms law. About 10 states are very restrictive, fairly restrictive in terms of can you get a permit to do that. The other 40 states are pretty loose, relatively speaking, pretty easy to get a firearm permit to carry a firearm. Well, back in 1813 in Kentucky, this was a law enacted, one of the first enacted, to prevent the wearing of concealed arms by persons. And there is a fine that goes along with it. And indeed, if you are fined, half of that fine is to be used to be given to the informer, the person who turned you in. So there's a financial incentive to do it. And the rest of it goes to the use of the Commonwealth, goes to Kentucky. Virginia enacted a law, this is a hunting recreational law, 1839, to prevent the destruction of wild fowl in 2 counties in Virginia. If you're killing wild fowl like ducks, and you do it from a skiff, right, a shallow boat, that's a crime. And if they catch you, you lose your gun, you lose your skiff, the person who turned you in gets half of the proceeds from the sale of these things, half to the informer, and the rest goes to the Commonwealth for the use of the literary fund. My friend Joe, who's in the room here somewhere. Literary fund, right? To fund education. Oh, okay. Alabama. I mentioned that this is another concealed carry law. What's interesting in particular is that the beginning of the law states what their feeling is about people who carry concealed weapons around with them. To suppress the evil practice of carrying weapons secretly. If you're carrying a concealed weapon, you're up to no good. Period. And that's why almost every state enacted laws like this, although they began in the South. Why? They had a crime problem in the South, a rising crime problem in the pre-Civil War South. Wyoming. I mentioned Wyoming here, or put it in 1876, because this is the Wild West. Wyoming is a territory. And this also is a law to restrict the carrying of concealed weapons. The real story of the American West is that the settlement of the West and the features that are related to the settling of the West included gun controls, strict gun controls, no carrying. And I have an example right here. You might recall from movies or popular culture the famous gunfight at OK Corral, 1881, Tombstone, Arizona. Wyatt Earp, you remember, it's been made into movies many times, popularized. Well, that confrontation that led to the gunfight at OK Corral between Wyatt Earp, the sheriff, and his brothers, and Doc Holliday, and the Clantons and their friends, was precipitated because they were violating Tombstone's concealed carry law. No concealed carry, no carry of weapons in the town of Tombstone. And this is the law that was passed in April of 1881. The gunfight at OK Corral was October 1881. Strict gun laws were a chief feature of the so-called Wild West, which it turns out wasn't nearly as wild as popular culture would make out. Now, a lot of stuff on here. I want to make a simple point about this. The heading here says state laws barring semi-automatic weapons, the years 1927 to 1934. This was maybe one of the most surprising findings that I came across in this vast pool of information about laws, because it presaged a contemporary debate. In 1994, Congress passes a law called the Assault Weapons Ban, which restricted 19 named types of so-called semi-automatic assault weapons, weapons that were formerly legal. A furious debate, and there continues to be a big debate about that, and it's a perfectly legitimate debate, right? Should civilians be allowed to have such weapons, or should they not? What's at issue? That's perfectly legitimate debate. But what's most interesting is that back in the 1920s, between 7 and 10 states in America, depending on how you count the laws, I've only presented 5 here, between 7 and 10 states enacted laws that significantly restricted semi-automatic weapons. There were already, and being put in place during this time, restrictions against fully automatic weapons. A fully automatic weapon, you depress the trigger and a continuous stream of bullets issue forth from the gun. And civilians basically can't own those guns, and that's been true for many, many decades. But semi-automatic weapons are pretty common, meaning a gun fires with each pull of the trigger. But in fact, those semi-automatic weapons were severely restricted by laws in between 7 and 10 states back during this period of time, 1927 to 34. This was maybe one of the most surprising things that I came across. Now, this law, I've left off the state from which it came. And you can see that it says, an act providing for the registration of all firearms and weapons and regulating the sale thereof. This is a very comprehensive registration and licensing system of all firearms of every and any description, including the transfer. Even if you give a weapon to somebody else, you've got to go to the county sheriff, it says here. Now, a law as sweeping as this, which would certainly raise the hackles of gun rights people today, you might think represented some contemporary effort to change the law, in New York State, maybe, right? Because we have a strict new gun law here called the New York SAFE Act, or from, some zealous pro-gun control organization. But this law was enacted in the state of Montana in the West, the year 1918. 1918. That was 100 years ago. 96 years ago. Well, math, who cares, really? Okay. So, my conclusion. The first gun grabbers in America were not 1960s shabbily drinking liberals, but 16th and 17th century rum-guzzling pioneers. The confrontation between gun regulations and gun rights is really false. Why? Because in most of America, these two things went hand in hand. They were not a contradiction. They were integrated with each other. And that's not the debate we're having now. Maybe the debate should change. You could talk about that too. But my bottom line is, in fact, historically in America, these two things go hand in hand. And I thank you for your kind attention.